Commonwealth African Summit, a high-level multi-stakeholder event that annually brings together government and business leaders from the Commonwealth and allies to facilitate dialogue and action on key and relevant issues ranging from trade and investment, entrepreneurship and job creation, economic development, security and counterterrorism, as well as energy and power, amongst other relevant issues in Africa, has ended.
The 2020 Commonwealth Africa Summit is specifically designed to promote a stronger and valuable Commonwealth with great emphasis on Africa. Well, Arise London correspondent Afia Odom attended the summit and put together this report.
The Commonwealth Africa Summit is in its 7th year, but it's a different world that we live in. It's a post-Brexit world, and the UK is looking to forge more links with the Commonwealth culturally, socially and politically. What role can women play in this brand new conversation and helping continue to drive the continent of Africa forward? It's Commonwealth Week in London, and as the attention moves away from Meghan and Harry in their last appearance, the focus is now on the Commonwealth Africa Initiative and its partners to generate new ideas, trade agreements, business relationships and investments between the UK and other Commonwealth countries after Brexit. The role of women in African development and the Commonwealth cannot be underestimated. African women have often been described as a powerful, untapped economic force, and there is no doubt that they will be absolutely integral in addressing the development challenges Africa faces. But how best do we incorporate women, over half of the growing African population, in a way that goes beyond the quotas and targets that often fails to address the structural drivers of gender inequality? Justina Mutali, founder and president of the Justina Mutali Foundation and African Woman of the Year, says education is key.
When I got into this feminist movement, the global feminist movement, I was very surprised to hear that in some parts of the world, when a family has to decide who to send to school, they'll send the boy child and leave the girl child at home. But that did not happen in my country, Zambia. When we got independence, our new government and president focused on education for every child. And it didn't matter whether you're a girl or boy, as long as you were of age, school-going age, you needed to go to school. So that is how I got educated. Other people a little older than me got educated. And you find that in my country, Zambia, although we haven't gone as far as Rwanda, but at the moment we have a woman vice president, we've had a woman minister of finance. These are positions that in most countries, when they talk about gender equality, they bring a woman minister of gender, woman minister of culture, lower ranks. But in Zambia, we've had a woman vice president, we've had a woman finance minister, we've had a woman head of the judiciary, we've had a woman head of the central bank, we've had a woman head of the police. So we've got a lot of women in very high positions in Zambia, but that is because of the policy that at independence, our new government embarked on educating each child. It didn't matter what gender you were. And in fact, at the moment, I think we are at 45% women, heading towards the 50% women in parliament and women in business.
Cultural and social norms are not often supportive of women's involvement in business, and many aspiring female entrepreneurs lack access to supportive networks and mentors, as well as negotiating power within their households and local communities. In her role supporting her husband, the Nigerian Commissioner to Sierra Leone, Fatima Abbas Mohammed has been instrumental in doing just that.
In Africa, we have a role to play. In terms of politics, women are the yardstick, they are the bedrock of every successful politicians in every continent. So we have a role to play in such a way that a woman should be given that opportunity to serve the nation, because as it's generally believed that when you educate a woman, you have educated the whole world, not even a nation. So if a woman is allowed, especially African women, we have so many things that we do, but everything we do always go unnoticed because we are not given that opportunity. So if in Commonwealth they will partner with the UK and call on African women to come together and exhibit their potentialities. And I said there that we need to come together as women. We need to share. We need to support one another. We don't need to feel, superiority over one another. Like me as the wife of Nigerian High Commissioner in Sierra Leone, what I do, I have to look for all these women, bring them together, and I come down to their level to make sure that, yes, I win their love, to tell them what is out there, that there are so many things in the whole world, that women, if we can come together and do it together, we'll be able to excel, and we'll be able to match, we'll be able to bridge that gap between us and our men counterparts.
Getting the most out of the Africa and Commonwealth relationship is very much dependent on the full inclusion of women across the overlapping political, social and economic spheres. Tina Alton, CEO of the Chamber of Africa Diaspora Relations, says women of the diaspora have an important role to play too.
I would say I think we are in a much more advantaged point, because being in the diaspora means you have a different view. Both of the continent and from the continent. And therefore, as a woman in leadership, that actually broadens your perspective, your ability to speak on issues both on and off the continent. When I think of the diaspora, I always think in terms of even the domestic remittances that goes in alone is much more than the loans and all those that our government or leaders are taking out, and therefore as diaspora we have a bigger part to play. If domestic remittance alone is that much, how much more when we think of commercial remittances? So I personally see the Africa diaspora as the key, or if you will, the golden ticket for Africa as far as its development is concerned.
Women in the UK and in Africa are all part of this new look Commonwealth in a post-Brexit world, and they are all fighting against the same causes: gender violence. We are trying to get more women to vote and also increasing the number of women in education. It seems that women on the continent of Africa can continue to play the role that they always have done, being the change makers and the backbone of the continent. Afia Adom, Arise News.
Right, joining us now is Afia Adom in our London studios. Afia, it's such a pleasure to talk to you about this, because it's very germane for Africa's development. We cannot untangle the relationship we have with the Commonwealth, the rich relationship. I mean, I think Anthony Joshua put it very aptly when he was speaking about this, when he said it could be your egusi soup, your chicken and chips, egusi papania and chicken and chips, but there's a common bond that ties all of us together. I just want you to take this into perspective and elaborate on this bond, owing to the fact that you two are from a Commonwealth country, my Ghanaian sister.
Oh yes, the bond between the Commonwealth countries, Ghana included, Nigeria of course, is one that has changed in this post-Brexit world, as I so rightly said there in my report. And yes, we had Anthony Joshua talking about all the different themes of identity and all the different things he identifies with, being Nigerian, being British as well. But of course, the Commonwealth relationship has changed and will continue to evolve in this post-Brexit environment, where the UK is looking to strengthen these bonds and looking to where they can have more trade relationships with different countries on the Commonwealth, and also socially, politically and politically and socially and economically there as well. So one of the main aims of the Commonwealth Africa Summit is to forge these kind of relationships and to bring all these people together in the same room. You have high-level delegates, people from the UN, people in different levels of government. I was talking with Jim Murphy yesterday, who's the former leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and he delivered a keynote speech on the future of the Commonwealth and the future of this relationship. And talking to him, you know, his time in government when he worked alongside Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, he sees this time of working with the Commonwealth as something completely different, and a place where these relationships can change and can be much more advantageous for everybody involved. Yes, we're talking about this in the context of a post-Brexit environment, but there is something for all kinds of countries to gain from this. It's about using their initiative and using all these platforms and convening all these people in one place and to look at the benefits and interests of all who are involved in this conversation for the common good within the Commonwealth. And it's all about talking about good government. So talking about effective leadership, we're talking about security, economy, and of course the issue of sustainable energy is a huge one. You know, if Africa are supposed to meet those sustainable development goals of 2030 and 2050, working together in the Commonwealth is a huge part of them reaching those goals.
Afia rightly said. I mean, just looking at the theme for this year, moving forward, stronger, valuable, it's an age-long dream for leaders of the continent. But there are issues there. And you mentioned all those aims of this particular summit. But there are other organizations such as the African Union and the United Nations already talking and discussing and tackling these issues of equality, energy, development, politics on the continent. So what is the biggest takeaway from this summit?
You're absolutely right that there is different organizations like the African Union, like United Nations, talking about all these things. I think when we are talking about it in the context of Commonwealth Week, as we are in here in London, we had Commonwealth Day at the beginning of the week, and it's Commonwealth Week all this week. You know, the main takeaways are working together. It's all about working together. It's all about democratic development, and it's all about inclusive empowerment. It's about fair trade. It's about garnering people who perhaps have been forgotten on the African continent and perhaps are seen as the people who could unlock the change and unlock the things that will take the continent forward. So it was talking about harnessing the power of a younger generation. You know, it's the youngest continent in the world. We have so many young people in Africa, and it's about harnessing the power that they have so they can be the change makers on the continent as well as women. And I spoke to lots of amazing women, and in fact I think the panel that I gained from the most was talking about how African women can be instrumental in the development of the African continent. So it's about a lot of what we talked about over the summit was about harnessing these people, bringing them into conversation in a real way. So it's not just about tokenism, it's about forging proper relationships and doing it together, connecting properly, innovating and transforming.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation and let you land on your point. Join us again. You're still watching the morning show here on Arise News, and still joining us from our London studios is Afia Adom to, of course, discuss the Commonwealth Africa Summit of 2020. Now, before the break, you were talking about the main takeaways from the summit. Can you land on your point before I ask you my next question?
Yes, so yeah, we were talking about the main takeaways from the summit, and you so rightly said, you know, you have organizations like the African Union and the United Nations who are kind of working together for a similar means, right? They're working together to drive the African continent forward. I think what we can harness from the Commonwealth conversation in that context is that if all these countries work together for a common future, it's about connecting, it's about innovating, and it's about transforming. And it's also about bringing together groups of people across the continent who perhaps the potential isn't being unleashed in a way that it has been before. So harnessing the potential of the younger generation and harnessing the potential of women. And like I said, one of the main panels that I got the most out of was talking about the role of women in African development and how women can be, you know, unleashed on the continent, and how getting them involved in a real conversation and not just about using quotas and quote-unquote affirmative action, actually properly encompassing women and properly bringing them into the conversation and unleashing their potential could be a huge way forward. I mean, Rwanda is an excellent example of this, that after the unfortunate genocide that took place there in the early 90s, the population tipped 60-40, so there was a lot more women in the country than men, and because of that, you've ended up with about 60% women in government. And yes, it is one of the most stable governments across Africa. I'm not saying that Rwanda is not without its problems. It absolutely is. But you can see what great things happen when you have women in governments. So like I said, it's not just about tokenism. It's about engaging groups that haven't been unleashed before in a real and honest conversation, and innovating through that and bringing them together to work forward for driving the African continent forward.
I mean, still on the subject of, the stronger inclusion and participation of women, what do you feel can be done to further push the role of women in African development?
I think when you talk about the role of women in African development, there's a few different things that have to happen. First of all, we always talk about educating the girl child and how important that is. And, it's not just about making sure that girls get into school in the first place, and that's primary and secondary. It's encouraging them to go into university, to do PhDs, to do masters, to go as far as they can within education, and having that discussion within the constraints that we have culturally across Africa. A lot of girls, as we know, are encouraged to get married, they're encouraged to settle down. And it's about saying to women that, look, you can have, not necessarily you can have it all, but you can have education, and you can have those cultural beliefs as well, and everything can be encompassed in the same thing for the progression of your life. So yes, educating girls is very, very important, and that's something that Justina Matali spoke to me about in my report there. And it's also about, like I said, engaging women in a real conversation, not just about tokenism, not just about quotas, but really, really embracing women and the roles that they play within society. We know that so many women have small and medium enterprises. It's about supporting those enterprises. We know that lots of women run the home but don't necessarily have power in the home and in their communities. So it's recognizing those women and recognizing the importance of those women, enhancing those roles that they have and supporting them within those communities. And it's doing it in a real way. It's full inclusion. It has to be overlapping. It has to be in political, social, and economic spheres. And these deeper levels will require a lot of change. It might be messy and it might be uncomfortable, but it's doing it in a real way that makes sure that women are in the conversation in an honest way, and it's not just about tokenism.
All right, Afia, real quickly, I'm sure the summit also talked about, the future of the Commonwealth and Africa. And I also want to segue that conversation into the Agenda 2063 for the African Union. And that agenda was very apt because it started, the African Union started in 1963. So by 2063, the African Union will be 100 years old. And by that time, there were some, landmarks that Africa should have made as a continent, and there's some areas we should have gone in terms of development. So, Mimi, what's the thought of the summit around the development of Africa? You can talk about the 2063 agenda of the African Union and the development of the Commonwealth in general.
Well, as you said there, the African Union had certain goals, and I'm sure the Commonwealth, when it started, had certain goals as well. These things have obviously become a moving target. And I think what we have to do is look at the changing environments that we're in and look at how Africa is facing different challenges that it did when the African Union started and when the Commonwealth started. I think what's really important at the moment and what's really going to make sure that the African continent keeps moving forward is to reach those sustainable development goals of 2030 and 2050. And they're not just about energy and they're not just about environmentalism. They're also about the development of the continent. And it's looking at it as a holistic and looking at it as a whole. It's about looking at those goals from all different angles, economically, socially, politically, and looking at how they all go hand in hand to take the continent forward. They are it needs to be a holistic approach, it needs to be a whole approach, and it needs to be cross-government. And I think that's the only way that you can continue the progression of the continent. But those goals are very, very important. We're always talking about sustainability and environmentalism, and I think we underestimate the importance of how powerful that can be to help us reach the other goals economically and politically. So I think it needs to be holistic and it needs to be a whole approach.
Well, Afia, as we wrap up, I mean, you attended this summit. Did you get a sense that this will not be another talk shop? It's one thing to have these takeaways, it's one thing to have these conferences and summits, but it's another thing to take action. With the generation we're talking about, and it coincides with the International Women's Day, Generation Equality. Do you get the sense that this generation is ready to take that action, and this is not just going to be another talk shop?
Do you know what? It's saying that it could be another talking shop is so relevant, right? Because we have so many of these summits and conferences and all these kind of things. And you're absolutely right. A lot of them is just a lot of words and lip service and not a lot of action. What I think is perhaps different about the time that we're in is, like I mentioned, we are in a post-Brexit environment. So the UK, particularly in the Commonwealth, need to forge these new relationships for trade. So it's, you know, when it's for the benefit of the UK and not just other Commonwealth countries, there seems to be a different sense. There seems to be more of a sense of urgency. So I do think now is the time where in fact this Commonwealth relationship could change, where in fact it could be less of a talking shop and more action could happen. And I do think that this generation could be the one to push it forward. You know, here in the UK and amongst the diaspora, there's so much more of a pride of being African, of being African descent, than there has ever been before across all spectrums. And I think that's going to be instrumental in driving this relationship between the UK and the Commonwealth forward and making sure that this generation does take action. And like you said, it's less of a talking shop and more action stations.
Well said, Afia Adam. Very great to have you join us this morning. Much appreciated. Arise News correspondent from our London studios.